Good evening, and we are live. Welcome to episode 19. Tonight is part 2 of this week's series on planning for different uh, pillars in preparedness. Last night we did grid down trades and services. Tonight we are going to focus on security planning and have some real great conversations like that. We'll probably go a little bit more in depth into security versus the broad strokes we were doing on some of the other stuff last night. So I think security is a misconstrued pillar of preparedness. I think there's a lot of focus in certain aspects of it and not enough in others. So we'll dig deep into that. And I'm sure Pablo and Aaron both have varying opinions, as do I, and we have different situations. But before we get started, just a little quick Florida hurricane sit rep. Checking all the sources that I like to check, and it's still status quo. It's getting a little bit closer, but they still don't know whether it's going to come close to Florida or curve. I think the hope and most of the opinions are it's going to curve, but we'll see. Probably more this weekend. We'll have a better idea. So remember, y'all, go on the Mike's weather page. Go to YouTube for Ryan, y'all. Dennis Phillips, he's local in the Tampa Bay area. Stay away from all the hurricane fear porn out there. You stick to the science and the facts, so we don't, we can all make the appropriate decisions. Most of this audience should be prepared for the most part anyways. It's really just gearing in from, let me pay attention to this and top off a few things here or there and decide whether you want to evacuate, hunker down, or help other people, especially the normies that normally don't take it too serious. And then they're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Be that steady Freddy and, help guide some people, hold their hand a little bit. It'll pay off in the future if we ever have an emergency situation. Okay. All right. So to start off, the reason I say I think people have challenges when it comes to security, I think a lot of it tends to be, hey, I go to the range and I can shoot this far, or I could shoot, move, and communicate. And those are all aspects of security. But really, when it comes down to emergency situation, there's not really going to be a lot of action all the time. So those of you that have been in the military before, or maybe even done security guard work, you know that most of the time, when you're in a non-combat situation, most of the time it's boring, and you're working at night. You're yearning for a distraction. Just to pass the time. If you're doing it by yourself, you wish there was somebody else, which can help pass the time and everything, but then you're distracted talking to somebody and not keeping eyes on things. So those are one of the many attributes that we got to look at. Plus, how many of us out here really have dug down and said, hey, you know what? How am I going to secure my property and the area around my property? When I say property, that could be your apartment down in Ybor City in Tampa, okay, and or in suburbia out in Riverview, or if you're in a rural property out in Plant City. There's different attributes that you're dealing with. So there's different ways you got to roll out your security, and then you're going to have different amounts of people that you're going to need in different kinds of rotations. So let's start off with Aaron, okay, giving that little bit of a context, okay, just give a general, 2-minute, your thoughts on security in the context that I've said, and some ideas of how you've helped others or with your own plan to where it's like, hey, how do you know how many people you need? How long are the shifts? What's the rotation? How far from your house are you going to, you put it? So we'll start with Aaron.
Yeah, that's obviously, people that have seen multiple episodes here know that I'm kind of, aside from having a messy office, security and training is definitely a passion, a hobby of mine. I've done the military. I've done security work. I've worked armed and unarmed. I've bounced. So I've kind of gotten to see it from a few different, um, you know, views. But to me, security was really the first thing in prepping that I looked at that made me realize I couldn't do it all myself, and that a lone wolf approach was ultimately going to be defeatist. Because at the end of the day, like, I have to sleep sometime. Um, Anybody who's met me in person knows I love a Monster Energy drink more than the next guy. But you know, I do have to sleep. I can't cure sleep with Monster and Cafe Con Leche yet. So I live in a relatively urban environment. I'm not in the suburbs. I don't have any residential neighbors, but the two people on either side of me are businesses. And so for me, that's security has meant little things like hardening the locks on my doors, changing from an inch and a quarter screw going into the door jamb and the strike plate to putting a 3-inch screw in there. But I've also started to look at security in depth, and a lot of people I've talked to in the prepping world have kind of mentally said that they're going to batten the hatches, and they're basically going to just close the gates and turtle up. And that's usually where people start out. But what I've found is that after a few years of doing prepping related activities, maybe getting some training, taking a couple of classes, realizing what you don't know, in part, and then also coming to the humbling realization that you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you just have a blind spot and you have no idea. For me, that kind of led me more to a place of, networking with local people. After hurricanes, we have a call list when we reestablish comms. Anytime there's a disaster or a protests or anything like that, I've got guys that I call and talk to, and we have plans in place to, be more out in the community, because at the end of the day, security is usually the euphemism for shooting and moving, communicating, all that other stuff. But I live in a wood frame house. I don't want to have a gunfight next to my family. So if it has to happen, and I'll do everything I can to avoid it, but I'd rather pick a time and a place way away from all the stuff I care about and all of my expensive stuff that can be broken by rounds going through it real fast. So that's kind of like my little 2-minute deal on security.
Yeah, you bring up some good points. One thing, being out in you don't have to go with a pack, rifle slung down, roaming the streets. I mean, you can go where people congregate, away from where you live, just to kind of get eyes on what are the people doing. So during, chaotic situations, we've learned from protests and riots and stuff like that, people gather together. They don't want to do it by themselves. For whatever their motivations, they're bored or they want to protest or cause havoc. They all congregate in certain areas. Now, who knows what determines what those areas are? I mean, if they're going to loot, they're going to go to the stores. But you can go near those areas and kind of keep, the pulse on what's happening. And I think Bear mentioned it from Bear Independent. I think it was during the George Floyd riot time frame or the Summer of Love. And him and his crew, they were out in the town. They were gray manning it. They weren't out slung rifles or anything like that. And they just were keeping eyes on things and communicating back. To me, I think if you're smart about it and you're in a small group, and you're blending in, I think that's a great way to go about it, because you kind of get a feel where what people are thinking about and which ways they're wanting to go, or what are they looking to do? Are they looking to, destroy some stuff, or now they, looking to steal food? It might start off with sneakers and TVs and jewelry or whatever, but eventually it's going to turn to supplies. So, um, I guess it's like, I guess in a sense, like recon. So,
Yeah. Well, it's
um,
just taking the temperature of your area. Um,
yeah,
I remember pre-COVID, my wife had just had wisdom teeth removed. She had impacted wisdom teeth, so like that's a hell of a surgery if you've never had it. Um, but I was driving, and it was like right before COVID, and everybody was just starting to dawn. They were just having it dawn on them that like, hey, this might go bad. Things that I want might not be here just to go up. So, with the area we were living at the time, I went to Costco because,
mhm,
like, if homeless people are doing something, or if conspiracy nuts are doing something, that's one thing.
yeah,
Um, Costco tells me how the suburban dad is, acting and reacting to this. And I remember like driving around, and everybody was incredibly aggressive on their driving, incredibly. And like I actually had a guy who sped up to cut me off. Like, so I'm coming out this way, and he speeds up and parks his minivan like broadside. It just like looks at me, mean mugging me. This is like probably a late 30s, early 40s,
mhm,
dad. He's probably wearing a, dry fit golf shirt, probably got a pair of shorts on, and Sperry topsider shoes. And I'm like, dude, I didn't do anything to piss you off.
yeah,
Like, I'm not over the last roll of toilet paper with you, and you got your family in the car, and you're pulling this crap. You
yeah,
know, like when people start acting like that, that's something that's really important to know from an intel side of stuff, because that changes how I react. I'm like, okay, now, I'm not leaving anywhere without a rifle in the car.
yeah,
Like that's, maybe the rifle needs to be next to a plate carrier. Maybe that needs to be next to medical,
mhm,
and that kind of like the more aware that you become of this stuff, the more I've seen people's view of what is appropriate at any given level of a situation change.
yeah,
Where before, it's like, hey, I've got my P365 XL, Sig Sauer pistol, and I can go out and be the community sheriff. I'm
mhm,
John Wayne's, bastard child. And then like now it changes to, oh shoot, man, I need a way to communicate. I need like a plate carrier. I'm not looking to, gear up and go solve problems for the local community, but I'm darn sure looking at like what a bad day looks like at that point,
mhm,
and thinking like, hey, if there's, if I have my one pistol with one reload on me, that's like I carry a Glock, so that's like 34 rounds, and there's 100 protesters that shut down an intersection. I don't have a good enough gun to get through that fight.
you're right.
People will say, "Oh yeah, well, you dodge that if you can, or de-escalate or whatever." And it's like, I can appreciate doing all of that, and that would all of those avoidance strategies are like first line for me, because ammo's expensive, my blood's expensive. I
Yeah,
don't have any parts on me, but at the end of the day, like sometimes the event chooses you, and you didn't really get a lot of prep knowledge. The guy that was the shot the guy at the BLM protest. Um, two white guys shooting each other at a BLM protest. So I mean, that's America for you, diversity in action. And he had his AK over in Austin, Texas,
yeah,
and
that's right.
he was a freaking soldier that was stationed there driving Uber to make ends meet. And he like saw that muzzle coming up, and he popped him.
Yeah. Well,
All that guy did was a wrong turn in Austin during one of those protests, and he didn't know where the protest was going to be.
yeah. Well, I think people need to look at these things from various lenses, because so if we go in the pre-riot days, okay, you just think of all the people massing together with high tensions. So
Mm-hmm.
before Amazon was a thing and stuff like that, you had Black Friday, chaos, okay, high tensions, people just behaving very badly, general Christmas shopping. So people from the Tampa Bay area, if you've ever been in Brandon during Christmas, and
Yeah.
how insane It is just in the mall parking lot. And, again, people just high energy, tensions going on. Then you roll into COVID and you're dealing with shortages and people panicking for, one way or another. Then you got the riots and all that stuff. So, you pick your poison, and someone might say, well, just don't be out in those areas and you wouldn't, have those opportunities to have a problem. Yeah, in theory. But, for the people that are well prepared and they don't have to go out for whatever reason, yes. But the rest of us, you never know when things are going to happen, where they're going to happen. And then you have a whole lot of normies who are important to us in this space because they're our friends and our relatives and what have you. So, what are your thoughts, Pablo, so far?
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's a little different because my area is more suburban. So I do have neighbors everywhere. Uh, it is somewhat, the development is somewhat isolated. So we don't really get a lot of random traffic here. Um, but from that perspective, it's a little harder because like the houses are fairly close to each other. So it's like patrolling and that kind of stuff. Like it would really depend on the situation, on what would
Yeah.
drive something like that. But having said that, it's really that important things that you always say, knowing your neighbors and having that sense of community. Like I know at least two police officers that live in this area. So in that kind of situation, like I would go to one of them. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've already met one of them. He's very nice. So I would go, it's like, hey, what do you think of the situation? This was going on. I'm here to help you. What do you want to do?
Yeah. And that's a good attitude to have about it. You know, um, and it's interesting you bring up that point because, I always, when I drive through communities, whether I live or adjacent ones, I always peep the scene and see what law enforcement agency is sitting in someone's driveway. And man, I must have seen at least 6 or 7 different squad cars in the multiple communities that are adjacent to mine, including mine. And, some people might have the perception like, oh, they don't like law enforcement. Well, I think by and large, law enforcement guys are just like the rest of us. They got families, like anything else, you could have a bad egg, but those guys just want to come home to their families. And, when these situations occur, a lot of times they're pulled away from their families. So I think it's important not only to know them, just like you're doing with your neighbor, okay, and what can you do? It might be as simple as, hey, keep an eye around my house. Let me know if you see anything crazy. you know Now, if you know the family, you can always reach out to the wife and check in on them and stuff like that. But that's a relationship that you can build. um but I think those things are important. Now, I got some notes here, and I was just like picking different security related I don't know, words or categories to talk about to see how they would apply. So we'll pick 3 different areas. We're talking about rural, urban, and suburban for all of these. Some of these might not be appropriate for those, or not as important as others, and they might not be practical to actually apply. But in any of those cases, you need manpower. So keep that in mind when you start commenting on these things. So kind of give some numbers and explain your estimate of why you think that number would work, or at the minimum, and how would you make it work. It doesn't have to be particularly about your homestead, your property, your house, but just in a general sense. All right. So you've seen a lot of prepper fiction and movies and TV shows. You see roadblocks. Okay. I've come to now, being that even though I was in the Marine Corps, I never had to man a roadblock, discuss the strategy of it. So there's probably a lot I do not know, but it just seems from the normie lens, just watching TV and reading books, it seems like roadblocks cause more confrontations than they provide security per se, because it seems like if you're trying to get from A to B and that town or neighborhood is between you and there and they got all the roads blocked, it's like forcing you into a situation. I can't drive 30 or 50 miles another direction and hope there's not another roadblock there. So my thoughts are like when people, especially in the small town kind of thing, maybe they sit there and think, hey, you know what? Let's cover all these different areas if they feel roadblocks are appropriate. Well, let's provide a path for people to get through, and we can keep an eye on them. We can escort them through, whatever the case may be, come up with some protocols. But if you're just going to set up roadblocks, you're just asking for confrontation, whether it's from just people that are desperate, crazy criminals, and what have you. So Pablo, why don't you start off about roadblocks and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, again, from the suburban standpoint, I don't really see it being very effective. In order to do that in this kind of area, you need a lot of people because there are multiple entrances, um, and if you have a pickup or any off-road vehicle, you can just try to bypass the roadblock. So what do you do then? Like, yes, you're blocking the road, but I can just go on this side on the grass, and I can actually bypass the roadblock. So what do you do then? From a suburban standpoint, it's a lot tougher. Now, I will say around here there are some gated communities, so they already have a roadblock per se, in a sense. It becomes a little more difficult, like if there's no power, like how do you lift the gates, move those stuff? And then in that kind of situation, I would imagine it would be hard for those communities to keep their whatever private security or company is managing that on a regular basis. Like they probably wouldn't stay and keep working. So like, how do you staff it? So from that perspective, those communities are kind of closed. So like, there's no point for random people to just go in there unless you're lost. But people who live in those communities are also the ones you call the normies. So like, I'm outsourcing everything to someone else. I don't want to, because I don't want to deal with it. But then in that situation, you will have to deal with it. So did you actually think about that? How are you going to do it? Are you actually prepared to do it? Now in other areas, it might, or if you have a really large property, I don't know. I haven't been in that situation, so it's kind of hard to. I haven't really thought it through. But at least the suburban space, I don't really see it being effective.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because if people want to sit there and do harm, they'll just go on foot and just weave in through all the houses and stuff like that. So, all right, Aaron, can you, if you happen to know, and I'm assuming that you do, what is the theory behind why roadblocks are done from the military perspective? And then give your insight about effectiveness in one scenario or another.
Well, it's usually like most roadblocks that most of the guys that I know of were basically set up as checkpoints. So they want to stop you and search you. They want to find out what contraband you have, if you're moving people you're not supposed to be moving, all that stuff. You'll see some roadblocks in like post disaster stuff like FEMA. They'll actually go in and they'll set up roadblocks on areas they don't consider safe, or areas that they may have cleared and evacuated, willingly or not, and gotten everybody allegedly out of there. And now that area is shut off. We don't want you guys going back there. So, with that, like, I look at roadblocks as something that I think of a little bit differently than most people. So to me, a roadblock is just a funnel. And it's to take people off of a path and make other paths seem less resistant to them so that they can pick a place and time of my choosing. So like if I fell a couple of the, millions of pine trees that we have here in Florida, or some of those live oaks that canopy over our beautiful roads, and I don't necessarily block off the road. I just block it so that you have to go to this like one little spot and you can kind of squeak by on the shoulder. Hopefully the drainage ditch isn't too squishy. And then you got to take another turn and get around this other tree and everything. But what that means is that you can't be in an F-350 and just freaking barreling down the road with a truck full of guys and just ram it. Yeah. So while I'm there, hey, while you're slowing down, I'm going to look over. Are you my neighbor? Are you, like those guys that I mentioned, the very first episode that I was on, or one of the early episodes I was on, where it was, the guys that were circling my block right during the hurricane.
Oh, yeah.
Like 2:00 in the morning. Dude, after the second loop, if you turn your lights on, or off rather, and you have 4 military-aged males going around in the teeth of a hurricane, and they're all different, different color than I am. I know that's profiling and it's not really politically correct, but that lets me know that there's a club that I'm not part of in that car.
Yeah.
And like their car ended up flooding out, so nothing happened. I stuck my head out the door and they just sat there for like 30 minutes, and then they opened up all the doors and the car was still flooded out the next morning when they left. But, even for the stuff like, in a suburban environment, you don't necessarily need to block everything off. If all you're trying to do is make sure that you don't have looters or people trying to do crimes of opportunity, or, people that are just going to sightsee, and you don't want their, Kia Sportage stalled out on the front of your road because it's flooded out and it's not meant for off-roading, right? You guys don't want to deal with that in your neighborhood. To me, that's a decent way to put a roadblock on. And because I'm not, in most of my use cases for a roadblock, I'm not setting up security like I would in the military. Like, I'm not here to arrest anybody. I don't care, what contraband you have. I'm just trying to get you to pick a couple of paths that give me enough time to make a decision about you and the amount of friction that you're going to encounter as you try to get in this area.
Yeah.
So, even with like Pablo was saying, oh, you just go over, on the shoulder. Cool. I've got a spool of barbed wire out in my garage. I'll throw it out in the grass. Once that wraps around your axle, I'm sure that'll be really great, to go in there. And then we have a talk about, hey, do you live here? If you do, why didn't you tell me you were coming? That kind of deal.
Well, I think it's good to sit there instead of like having like a man roadblock. It's probably more effective to have, like you said earlier, funneling, you and Brendan have both mentioned about, felling some trees and staggering them out to keep them from having a straight shot, so if you're kind of directing them in the direction, even if there's nothing nefarious on your end, and then instead of having like a man roadblock, you have like an observation post off to the side, listening post, which I think is more effective than a roadblock so from the suburban perspective, having listening posts, observation posts are better than trying to do a roadblock. And oh yeah, Brendan. Where's that Amazon link? Oh man. But yeah,
joined that affiliate program. He sold me so much crap off of Amazon. I've done the same thing to him, but
yeah,
we ought to be getting commission off of each other at this point.
Yeah. And I think it goes easier on the manpower situation. So for those that maybe not been in the military, there's observation posts and listening posts. To me, they kind of do the same thing. Listening and watching. You could be up in a tree stand, or you could be up in a tree, or just off the side of the road in a little, like when we did the thing at the ranch where Brendan made the little campsite, the little camouflage thing. You can make a little blind, you know. You hang out there, just kind of watch who's coming down the road, and so if you're in the rural area, maybe you stagger the logs and you do that. But if you're in the suburban area, you can be in a blind, or you can do like a light patrol within the neighborhood.
Yep.
You know, or the fact that if you have neighbors, whether you've connected with them before or connect with them afterwards, you hand them a bow fang, already pre-programmed. This is how you do it. Click, click, and keep us updated. Anything you see, let's check in every whatever number of minutes. You know, you can make little cue cards. Hey, this is all you got to do. These time slots. And then, you know, you rotate it around. I think whatever your security plan, huh?
I was going to say, you can make a field telephone with $20 worth of trash off of Amazon, and it's field expedient. It's old technology that runs off of a hardwire, but whatever cable you decide to run it off of usually are fairly cheap to buy in bulk. And now you have a hardline comm system that goes back and is hard to intercept, right?
Yeah.
It take a lot of power to work. If you look at those old movies of like World War II, you'll see the guys cranking on the old field telephones.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the original tech. And it's not Gucci, it's not Baofeng, it's not ham, it's not encrypted comms or anything like that. Which so many people have forgotten about those old tech solutions.
Well, it's kind of encrypted. Like it's hard to hack it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to do something to the wire.
Yeah.
At that point, it's not broadcasting anything.
Yeah.
But with that, like it's. I look at those roadblocks and those LPOPs, and I think for a lot of preppers too, even if you could never see yourself roadblocking something, a lot of us that have routes where we plan to bug out don't think that maybe somebody's putting a scared 16-year-old kid up in a tree stand with a 30-06 and telling them, don't let any car that you don't recognize go up this road.
Yeah.
So, kid falls asleep on guard duty, wakes up because he hears your, little prepper caravan going through and then puts a couple into your engine block. Like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Where you get new parts during a crisis.
Yeah, and when people are panicking, and then you mix that with personalities like the lone wolf guys, or the guys are like out of my dead cold hands, they'll just, it's like something triggers in them that they start to like they want the balloon to go up because they want to live all the prepper fiction. Okay, or all the John Wick movies that they've watched in real time, and I think those kind of personalities tend to want other people to do the dirty work, and they want to like be in charge, and that's their thing. So I think it's important that people are mindful and understand what security really is. So when you get some, wackadoodle dude who just happens to be the one that steps up in the neighborhood, and all the sheep just start following behind someone that sounds like they have a plan because they don't want to be in charge, so then you can sit there and say, oh, buddy, how about we do this? Or, I'm not going to do that. Pablo,
I was going to say, even on the water episode, one of the things I was thinking about from the suburban environment, you guys were talking about those retention ponds. Mm-hmm. How are you going to react when your HOA decides that because they were in the HOA, they're now in charge of all of the community resources for your retention pond? Like, I don't know too many people that have lived in a suburban environment that haven't caught some grief off of an HOA. For whatever reason, HOAs just tend to attract a certain personality. And that's when things are good. That's when the lights will still turn on and the toilet will still flush.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like a room full of Karens wanting to reassert control over their environment, sitting around in a room going, all right, like we're going to take over the, the retention ponds. Those are all community resources now.
Yeah. That's a good point to bring up because I was on a HOA board for 2 years. I was a VP. So I've seen it from that lens, dealing with all the Karens and the cuckoos, the people that just would complain about everything. They just lived for the fight. And then from the resident perspective, you just watch, if you're on Nextdoor, my God, those people, they just will bicker about anything. And that goes for all the social media platforms. It doesn't matter what the topic is. People just love to argue. I was telling the panel last night about, or maybe I did it in the green room, where I posted in a whole bunch of Facebook groups about, hey, what are some good ways to, secure a window to keep the debris out? So basically, I already know you can sit there and nail in plywood on the outside.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't own the house, and there's 2 floors. I'm not getting up on a giant ladder, hauling up a heavy piece of plywood to go do that. I was looking for something that I could be better than me putting a mattress and an armoire against the window. Just to take some. I don't care about the window breaking. But the point being is that you see how nasty people were. People are giving comments. I'm like, oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Love the insight. Great idea. And then people just start arguing with each other because they start sharing their opinion. Oh, that's going to be useless. That's not going to do anything. Who are you? Don't tell me. And then they just start bickering and arguing. So that's the kind of stuff that, I envision in HOA communities like I live now and where Pablo lives. You're going to have that same stuff going on.
You don't have to envision it. You're dealing with it right now, just at a lower level of stress. So if a thread like that is all it takes to set those people off, like, wait till the water hasn't turned on for a week.
Yeah. Yeah. And, what happens on day 1 versus day 3 versus day 7, as hope deteriorates, frustrations build, desperation builds, and changes people's attitudes. Now, I like to think that it'll also have the reverse effect where people that were resistant or not compliant will start to soften up and be compliant because they realized, oh, crap, I don't have a solution for this. Let me listen to what this person's saying. Because I'm a big advocate for, people to get out and take charge in their community. Okay. And that doesn't mean get out and say, oh, I'm the boss and everyone listen to me. You do it in a leadership way versus being a boss. Okay. And I like to think that everyone knows the difference between a boss. Anyone can be a boss and tell people what to do, share their opinion. Where a leader, he inspires, okay, collaborates with people and leads by example. So why would you do that instead of being a lone wolf or hunkering down? Because you're going to be surrounded by desperate people. And if you don't focus their attention outwards, away from your street at the very least, when they get desperate and they want to go pillage or go have confrontations with people, then they're going to get you. I mean, people, when they have drama, they feed on themselves. So you get a lot of local crime. It's usually by local people. Now, there's always people that will come out from other areas to go and do stuff. But you get, a lot of the car break-ins where people leave their doors open, leave their guns in their car and their doors are unlocked because they forget or whatever. Odds are those are local people. Okay. They're out 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, Jimmy and the handles. And because they live in that community, they know the area. And it's not like they all come from Ybor or Suitcase City and then come up to suburbia, No, it's the kids in the neighborhood that are doing most of that stuff. And the kids that live in Ybor and Suitcase City, they're doing it in their neighborhoods for the most part. So you kind of got to, even if you don't know your neighbors, you better learn about them very quickly. So on those first couple of days, get out there. It's like, oh man, what do you guys think? Play dumb, be inquisitive, see what their opinion, see what, like when you're sitting there and you're trying to find gold out of the river. You're scooping up some of the sediment to see if any gold nuggets pop up. You should do that in your neighborhoods, because if you sit there and try to act right away, like, oh yeah, I think it's this, it's just EMPs, it was the Russians, or it's the government, and blah blah blah, they're either going to be like, you're cuckoo, or, ooh, he knows something, and he's talking like, well, yeah, I was prepared, and you're puffing their chest. Okay, well, we know where we're coming, so be smart of it. So the reason I bring these examples up, because part of security, okay, is a term we use in this space called OPSEC. Well, maintain your OPSEC once the balloon goes up, okay, and feel people out, and figure how they think. People, and I've mentioned this before on shows, hiking is one of my most favorite activities, and I purposely have conversations with people because I learn more about people during that one hike than I do any other activity. People want to tell you about themselves inherently. Not everybody, but people in general. So we need to blend that in to stuff. Pablo, did we turn to you for listening posts and observation posts?
Yeah. So your points are, you guys made good points about, from my perspective, I don't see it very useful here. But if I need to go to someone else's house to help them out or something, what if I run into a roadblock that I didn't expect? Like, I have good intentions. I'm going to my friend's house to help them, but they don't know my friend. So, like, I'm telling the truth. Like, hey, I'm going to so and so's house because they need water or water, whatever tools I have in the back. It's like, well, I don't know who that is. I don't know you. So, what's going to happen? How do you deal with it? Provided they don't shoot your block before they actually talk to you.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you deal with that? Like, it could be a few miles from here. It could be 10 miles from here. Do I just try to negotiate? Do I just turn around, or what? That's something to consider. And the other thing about the HOA is, like, yeah, I haven't thought about that really. Fortunately, the HOA I have now is pretty good. The people are very relaxed. They're very nice. I've asked a lot of questions, and for things that I would thought they would say no or give me an issue, like, they know, you're fine as long as you do this and this and this, you're fine. It's like, oh, okay. So fortunately, I don't really see that being a problem here. But it is something to consider, because the place where I was before, those people were a nightmare. Oh yeah, I have so many stories about HOAs there. It's so bad. But there is a politician in Florida that's trying to put some legislation to get rid of them. So hopefully that actually goes through. But yeah, it's a tough. It's tough to try to think. I don't know if Aaron's has some tips on how to deal with those roadblocks in the scenario that I presented. So, like, if I'm going to a friend's house and I run into a roadblock that I didn't expect, like, do I just turn around before I actually get there? Do I try to negotiate with them if I don't know them? Like, how would you negotiate that?
So one of the things that I always look at is, like, everything that I have in my vehicle, I try to make seem as uninteresting as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when I carry a rifle around, it's not in a big bag with a bunch of Molly on the outside. And, I don't have a Punisher skull stuck on, like, my boxers and on the headrest of my car and everything. Like, I'm not praying to the patron saint of extrajudicial killings. So dealing with roadblocks, when I've dealt with them over in, like, Central and South America, you see somebody in uniform stop you. You don't know if that guy's legit or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I speak some Spanish. I don't speak enough to be super cool about, like, hey, that guy's got the wrong accent for this region. He's cartel, or, hey, that guy talks like a Yucatan redneck. That's, he's a good old boy. He's from here, But what I found is, like, having small gifts that you can easily hand out and break those up into multiple different like packages. So like if you say, hey man, you know, I know you guys are out here and I definitely appreciate the neighborhood security you guys are providing. I've heard of the stuff about the looters too. I'm over here. Here's my buddy's, you know, neighborhood that he's in. I'm trying to go take him some supplies. You know, he said he was running low, him and his daughter. But hey, while you're out here, you know, I don't know about you guys. We haven't had running water at my house for a little while. Here's a thing of baby wipes so that you guys can, you know, at least take a field bath on that. It's not a bribe, right? We just thank them for what they're doing, offered them a small gift. I pull out one thing of baby wipes so that he doesn't know I have 20 in a box in the back.
Yeah.
Because, you know, all of a sudden guys at a roadblock can get really freaking handsy, you know, when they're like, hey, you know what's better than one baby wipe? That whole freaking case. Or I'll wash your mouth out with a 12 gauge.
Yeah.
You know, so and having little things like that, knowing what your trade goods are in that area. You know, post World War II, France, like you could get a lot with chocolate bars, condoms, and booze. You know, the stuff that guys were getting great wine from all these French vineyards and having French mistresses and stuff just because they had, you know, GI food and, you know, GI luxuries to trade when they were rebuilding after all the violence that happened over there during the war. But like, you know, I'm a smoker. I use cigarettes as a barter thing. Like you'll find that that's like a camaraderie between smokers. You know, we're kind of the social lepers. So you see somebody out there, hey buddy, you got a light? Yeah, I just opened up this pack. This is like my last pack of Luckies, but here, you need one, man? I know they're short, you know, right now. Now all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, I'm talking to him about his family, you know, what his first dog's name was. Like, so that's kind of the social engineering on that. You know, if you're one guy going somewhere that you can say, hey, you know, I want to protect my buddy's privacy. I'm not going to tell you exactly his address, or I might give you a fake address, you know, for his neighbor or whatever. But hey, he lives over here in Fishhawk, you know, or he's over in the west end of Hudson, Florida. You know, I know they got hit pretty hard because they're a little bit closer to the coast over there. You know, I'm just trying to bring you some gear so him and his wife and his little baby girl, he's got a little 3-year-old, just make up a story as you go along. And like, it makes you more human, and it also sets people at ease. And, you know, then you usually, once you've humanized yourself, offering that small gift has gotten me through a lot of different mission trips in a lot of different areas. Like we used to have a fixer when we crossed the border from Mexico to Belize, and, you know, the fixer would always put like $100 bill in the front of all of our passports. You've never seen sleight of hands like a Mexican border agent, like making $100 US just poof. But all of a sudden it's, oh, hey, gringos, you know, we love having you here. We hope you come back soon. Like, let me put you through the express lane. No, they're just missionaries. It's just Bibles and crap. We don't need to worry about what's in their bags. Like, let's get these nice people on the way. Because I gave him, like, you know, if I have a missions group of 10 people, I just gave him freaking 6 months' wages at his salary. Yeah, he's going to bend over backwards, and he'll remember me when I come back. Right? So, and with the HOAs too, like, fortunately in Florida, you have such a great opportunity by getting involved with your HOAs as a disaster relief committee for the community. And like a lot of people say, hey, you know, like, figure out what the personality types are. And hey, man, you seem like you're really good at running things. You're the man in charge. Why don't you head up our hurricane community? You know, we'll start some food drives just in case anybody gets hit with like no power, or they get unlucky on like a transformer getting hit somewhere and it blows out their fridge. You know, we'll have some canned goods to give to them. And like that way too, you can start meeting your neighbors. You start networking with the people around you. You start figuring out what the personality types are, and just as beneficial as finding who you should deal with, finding people to keep an eye on, or like, hey, I noticed you've got a lot of gang tats and there's needle tracks on your arms. I have no idea why you're living here in the suburbs, but I need to have a plan in place for you, because if you start fiending for your dope, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with this during a crisis.
Well, that brings up a point that I got in my notes, Aaron, because I don't know if he would. I guess it'll fall under the observation post, listening post. Might delve into the patrol a little bit, but if you have areas around your neighborhood per se where people congregate that are not residents of that area,
Yeah.
okay. We have that now, okay, in a makeshift community. Just imagine those would probably increase or become more dangerous during times of crisis. So I think it's important to where, just like we were saying, you can go out into town, kind of lay back, kind of just great man it, listen to see what's going on. Kind of got to do that with where people congregate that are not over there looting stores or breaking stuff or what have you. Homeless camps, drug dens, and stuff like that. So if they're, and I don't know what the distance would be, what would be good, because I don't understand the patterns. Just say homeless people, like, because they stay in their camp communities, but I don't know how far they generally venture out. Is it just out to some major cross street so they can panhandle, or somewhere they know where they can cop if they're going to do drugs, or if they just wander around and getting their steps in? I don't know. I mean, you guys have any insight on, the patterns of homeless people and just using them example?
Well, Pablo, you got anything, or?
No, I actually haven't seen anything like any congregation of people, whether they're homeless or whatever, in this area.
Yeah.
So yeah, at least just trying to think where I am, I haven't noticed any of those.
Yeah, it's really limited. Like in my area, I will only see it. There might be one, maybe a couple people, and they'll be off the side of the road behind the bushes. So if you just catch it with your eye, you'll see a tent or a bunch of stuff hanging off of tree branches. So it's like quasi camouflaged, but it's not like literally on the road. So outside of that, you might see someone on an intersection median or at the edge of a parking lot trying to panhandle. I tend to see more women with young children, okay, outside of store parking lots, panhandling. Then I see guys out panhandling in general, which has been a shift for me, because it used to always be guys. But now it's like there's a lot of women doing it with young children.
Yeah, I was over in Brandon, which is fairly nice area, fairly well built up. It's not super seedy or shady. There's some crappy parts to it, but I grew up there. So like, I remember we were going to our favorite little Vietnamese place, me and my wife, and there's this lady, skinny as a rail, obviously a tweaker, got some spots of drug use and malnourishment and everything. And she comes over and she's making the same pitch every time. So I actually talked to her a little bit. I use it as an opportunity for training when they approach me. Try to get some of their story out of them, see where their script is, what they're uncomfortable with. Like, if I want to close the conversation or keep it going, like, oh yeah, turns out, if I ask you if you've heard the good news of our Lord and Savior Xenu, you freak out and leave. But if I ask you if you, have you accepted Jesus into your heart and you want to tell me your long, drawn out conversion story, and now use that as a bridge to ask me more, I was like, oh no, stepped on a landmine there. Conversation's going on too long. But at the end of the day, like, homeless people, like I know they're in Ruskin. I know they're in Waimama. I know they're in South Hillsborough County. Like, they're really good at living in kind of like the cracks that most people don't see if you're commuting to a regular job and you're going places. And like, we have a huge amount of them here for a couple of different reasons, but and my house is next to one of the drug parks that they have here in Plant City. So like I see a lot of them going to and coming from, because they can cut through my little driveway on the side and get to the drug park the back way. They don't have to, have a lot of visibility, and they steal stuff off my front porch occasionally.
Aaron, you just self-doxed yourself, man. Where's your OPSEC?
Dude, at this point, like, even not having access to any of the PI stuff anymore, I can find anybody's home address just knowing their first name and how to spell it. Like a general area, I'm involved in multiple businesses. I'm on a freaking podcast. Like,
yeah.
And I guess maybe I could be one if you just saw me out in public with my family, but like people that know me from this space, it's not hard. I've been involved in the community for 20 something years.
Now that you mentioned that, in my mind, or the concept that I have of homeless people is a lot different, because I'm coming from Colombia. I have noticed there is close to 75, actually close to the range.
Yep.
There is a little area where I see porta potties and trailers. Like, why would there be a trailer there and a porta potty there? Like, that makes no sense, because there's no official road. There's no official entrance. I've never seen people, but I do see the porta potties and the trailers. So it's not really a camping situation. But at the same time, like, they're nice trailers. So yes, you can have a nice trailer and be homeless, technically. But I have noticed that, but again, I have never seen people in that area.
Yeah, they're usually like, humans are animals. We require a lot of the same things that animals do to survive and thrive. That food, water, shelter, and security thing, that goes for everybody who's a human. So one of the things I do is, like, I'll check if I'm moving into a local area and see what the like homeless relief stuff that they offer. A lot of places will give them free food. There's a feeding spot right behind my house. Like, literally, I can go in my backyard and hit them with rocks. Not that that's how I choose to spend an afternoon, but if I wanted to. But with that, like, you can go in and, you see, like, if they're giving these people resources at a specific time, they're going to train the community to show up there at that time. I guarantee you, if you go to some of the restaurants that are probably near the nearest interstate off ramp for yourself, Pablo, like, and you start looking at around closing time, where they're getting rid of all the old food, like, you'll probably see some people start dumpster diving. It's rare unless you have a planned community like the Villages here in Florida, which is a bunch of retirees that, they're paying for their security. And if you're not 55 and up, or you're not there to provide a good or a service for somebody who's 55 and up, they don't want you there. So, they pay for the cops to make that go away if they need to. But for most communities here in Florida, like, we have a very temperate environment. We don't have hard freezes. So, the chances of you dying from getting cold here are really low. So you come down from up north, people do that. We call them snowbirds. But at the end of the day, homeless people are just people, man. So, like, looking where those resources are, being able to check that, and then figure out, okay, do I have local camps? Do I have local, clusters of services that they might provide? We have an inpatient treatment facility here in my little town, and they're constantly bringing people in.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, homeless people are humans, because we're having this conversation. It's not to dig on homeless people. It's just giving a current present day example, okay, of people that have limited or no resources, and they congregate and how they do it. So we get into an emergency situation, it's going to increase. And right now, you could generally say homeless people are either people that are addicts, recovering addicts, and or have mental health issues, down on their luck. But when an emergency situation comes around, you're going to see an expansion of that. Just so, like, if we had an economic downturn in this country, I mean, there's already a lot of people that are living in their cars, their van or their truck. Yeah, some of them are YouTubers, some are just doing it because it's practical or whatever. But that's going to increase. So we'll see. Because I am a believer of things will gradually grind down to whatever it's going to be. It's not going to be like, boom, EMP and all the lights go out and it turns into The Walking Dead or The Road or, some apocalyptic dystopian thing in like a week. It's more likely we'll have economic downturn, all kinds of different civil or military conflict type situations and impacts from that. But you're going to see more and more people that don't have anything. Just like with the Great Depression, all kinds of layoffs were happening for people. And guys would just, hey, I'm going to go where the work is. I'm going to go and try to get a job over 2 states. And then they never came home. They didn't send no money back. Or they went and got a job building something and ended up getting killed or whatever the case may be. So you'll see where society starts to break down, people are going to form their own little camps and they won't be the traditional homeless person. They'll just be regular people that just lost everything. And then boom, it makes me wonder because we had those fires in Maui a couple years ago and all those local people lost their houses. I'm wondering how they handled all those people. Did they end up just going camping somewhere? I mean, with the weather being so mild in Hawaii, just to give an example, and that's isolated. So then you could throw some resources at it, maybe relocate them, put them up in hotels or what have you. But if you have an emergency situation where it's regional at the very least, like when we have a hurricane come in, we got linemen coming from all the different states, in the region to come help us. But if you have some emergency situation happen and multiple cities or areas in a region are impacted, they can't send all those resources. So things will shift in our local communities and, we have to adjust our security planning for that. All right. So if we'll switch over to Overwatch. So Aaron, why don't you give your definition of what Overwatch is from the military perspective in the Army and kind of how you've adjusted your view of it and what scenarios do you find Overwatch, viable or useful, whether it's in rural, urban, or suburban area?
So Overwatch, like in the military perspective, is typically like if I'm out with a team doing something, I'll have somebody with Overwatch on me, and that guy might be, flying in a plane. He might be, a gunship that's going around, or he might be somebody as low tech and small as just like a sniper team that's watching and telling me, hey man, when you turn this corner, you're gonna find some bad guys. In the civilian perspective, like Overwatch is one of those things where to train somebody for it is so far down the line. To me, like after we work on all these other core attributes, yeah, okay, if you want to learn how to make like 1,000-yard shot or, call in stuff or, scout or whatever, that's more in lines with Overwatch. Because people like, I always used to laugh if people would talk about getting up in the forestry towers and using those to look out over, their surrounding area. And, at the end of the day, like if you're up in a tower like that, now you're isolated. How fast can you get out of there?
Yeah.
If I'm a raider and I just dump, 50 gallons of gas on a couple of railroad ties that I just chunked at the bottom of that tower and set it all on fire, like how long do you think that thing's going to maintain structural integrity?
Right.
You know, so that's where it kind of blends into the LPOP ideas and having, listening posts or places that you can watch known areas of interest, for really short periods of time. Like you don't want to have somebody, especially somebody who's not trained, if you look at most meetings of preppers that I've been to, like they're not the 20 something hard chargers.
Right.
For a lot of preppers that I've met, like the natural enemy would be stairs, not, roving zombie biker hordes. So
Yeah.
like with that, teaching somebody how to make a hide, so if you go and you're making a field expedient shelter, I carry a little pair of Fisker's pruning shears in my bug out bag, and that's to help me construct a hide. I can take little branches and clip them and everything like that, and I can kind of have a visual screen so that I blend in a little bit better, if I want to throw up my hammock and mosquito net and catch some Z's before I have to go on. Or, if I want to make something more permanent, then that's okay. So we cultivate stuff, it's like, do I put up a deer stand, at that point? And like, there's levels of thought that goes into this as people start taking these lines of logic to their natural conclusion.
Yeah.
Where, at first you're like, hey, roadblocks are, no good in suburbia. Well, maybe instead of having 50 ways into my suburban development, maybe I just cut it down to 2. And then I watch those 2. Right? Yeah. Maybe it's on a block. People can still come and go. They just got to slow down a little bit. I want to see who's in your car and like, do you seem stressed out and everything, So like with the, LPOPs at first, it's just like, hey, we're going to put a kid here with a Baofeng. And then it's like, well, how do we train this guy to be a good guard? What's he looking for? Mm-hmm. What does he do when he gets bored?
Yeah.
I remember a few years back, TSA screeners had a 90% miss rate when they had their pen testing done, because as a human, you cannot focus on conveyor belts for more than, I think they said it was like 45 or 50 minutes before you need a break.
Yeah.
So if you sit there on an 8-hour shift, everything just starts to blur together.
Yeah. And I think it's important when you have your various functions in security, rotating people out, and it's fine. Sometimes it's based on the person. Sometimes it's based on what the job is. Because what might work for Pablo might not work for you, or vice versa. So when I think about like Overwatch, and I agree with you that we shouldn't have the mindset that we're trying to do military Overwatch, like with all the skill set and background and experience from behind it, because it's not viable. But for me, so if I'm thinking, okay, you got a rural property, and just say a lot of it is cleared, and then there's a tree line. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, if I got 2 people, do I put 2 on the roof or the barn to keep eye on these 2 sectors and the other 2 sectors for the other person? Or do I send them out on patrol? I think logically the Overwatch on the roof, that's what I'm calling Overwatch. Okay. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's a force multiplier, but it's just, I don't know what the right term would be, but they could see, you can cover more area visually with the 2 people at the higher ground, just like with radio coverage with line of sight, than if you got 2 guys walking around patrol, because then it's just timing for someone to bypass them. So if you got people working in your gardens or, helping, feed the animals and stuff like that, and they have their, security tool with them, if Overwatch is able to keep the field of view, and then they just radio down, sector 2, blah, blah, blah. Boom, everyone just drops their shovel and picks up their AR or pistol and, go to the positions and do their security plan.
So I think there's a place for both, because if you have if all you have is Overwatch, there's a military concept when it comes to designing fortifications called defense in depth.
Uh-huh.
And basically, depending on what school of thought that you subscribe to it for, right? You go in and you start with your outermost ring and you make that as good as possible. And then you make the next ring better because you never want to put yourself in a position of descending quality.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But like, I like the idea of, the patrols, for long range reconnaissance patrols. That's where the ham radio and the GRMS and our GMRS stuff comes in to me is, hey, I want to know what's going on. Right. So like if I'm setting out patrol out, it's not just walk a big circle that's like 10 miles around here. It's no, man. So here's the, all the interstate off ramps within 10 miles. I want you to check on them. Here's the sewage treatment plant. I want you to check on that. Mm-hmm. Here's the Walmart. Does it still look like Mogadishu in the parking lot? Like, I'd like to know. Oh, there's a big, horde of people just walking aimlessly that has no resources with them. Like that whole the migrant caravan that came up from, South America. Like, how fast are they going?
Yeah.
Did they seem like they're sticking close to the interstate? Or every time they hit an exit, are they stripping it of resources?
Right.
Like if we have to interact with somebody to keep them away from our family and the stuff that we use to provide, protect, and sustain our families, I'd said it earlier, but for me, I never want to have a gunfight if I can choose it, where a stray round might hit my daughter's pillow. Right? I'll have it as far as freaking away as possible where, like nothing around that area matters to me. I don't give a crap what my backstop is.
Yeah.
Like, man, sometimes you don't get to choose, but you're less likely to have that choice foisted upon you or made for you if you have that defense in depth.
Yeah. Well, I am a believer of, you can find a purpose for most people, regardless of how old they are, how mobile they are, and what have you. You just gotta, think it through. So if you have a 2-story house per se, and they got a porch or some windows, there's nothing wrong with throwing, some older people that are not as mobile, as long as they're able to sit there and use the binos, you do the basics of the radio and can stay awake,
If somebody gets up to P16 times a night, they're probably going to be awake anyway, so they might as well.
Yeah. And if you give them purpose, okay, that helps as well. So it's a win-win. I mean, because an able-bodied person is less likely to be comfortable and fulfilled by having to sit in a window watching a field, or part of a neighborhood. Because they want to run and gun, or they want to be doing whatever. Well, someone that has limited mobility, they'll be like, oh, I can do that. In
times when you have scarcity of resources, if certain people are not seen to be contributing, that's a friction point that develops.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm out here planting, and Jabba the Hutt over here doesn't do anything but eat my freaking food and foment disorder back at camp while I just worked a 16-hour day.
Yep.
Like, he's one wrong sigh away from catching the back of my hand at best case scenario.
Yeah.
Right. But the other thing is, like, everybody who's engaged and has a job and is, can feel like they're contributing to the level that is appropriate for them, those people aren't sitting there feeling sorry for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That long range reconnaissance patrol that I talked about, like, those guys want a hot meal and a shower, and whoever their romantic partner is, typically whenever they get back from being out in the field for a week.
Yeah.
Right. So if you keep that hot meal going for me, and I can walk in. I don't care if it's, freaking stew and crusty bread that's, 2 weeks stale.
Mm-hmm.
I've been eating MREs, bro. Like,
Yeah.
I'll eat boot leather if you put enough gravy on it,
Yeah.
But that's, that's kind of almost like a mental health and security aspect that you're looking at. If you have a community, people that aren't used to working together,
Mm-hmm.
you might know your neighbors over in the burbs, but knowing them and having a friendship might just be, hey, Bob, saw you put your third garden gnome out. Make sure the HOA doesn't cite you for a violation, or like waving at each other when you're going to your 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 in the mornings.
Yeah.
But it's not like, hey, this guy comes over, to my house for beers once a week.
Yeah. Well, I think, one thing that gets neglected, or a set of things, not really one. So it's figuring out how many people you need to do the logistics of your property, your house, or what have you.
I gotta dip out real quick. My wife just told me she has an emergency.
Okay.
So, all right.
No worries, man. All right. So what I was about to say was, we got to figure out, based on where our house is and what we have going on, what are all our logistics? Okay. Someone's got to take care of the food outside. Someone's got to cook, clean, watch the kids, maintaining what we have going on. Then you got to do security, and no one can just do security or wash, the dishes and what have you, or prepare the food. Everyone's going to have to do multiple tasks. And I think we need to be mindful of that and be mindful about how we schedule those, because do you want a guy, just use an example, to go and break his back digging ditches or whatever, doing all his physical labor, and then he goes and has to go do security for 2 or 4 hours, and he just had like a 16-hour day or whatever? Is he going to be that effective, especially if his security stuff is at night?
Sorry, I'm back there.
Okay. All right. What I was saying is that we need to be mindful of how we figure out the logistics of how we run the property. That could be washing dishes, making food, everything, including security, and that everyone has to wear multiple hats. Okay. And then we have to be mindful about how we schedule people in doing their multiple jobs. So if a guy's out digging ditches for 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever the case may be, do we sit there and just have him go grab some chow real quick and then go do a 4-hour security thing at night? You're just asking for something that is already boring, and it's at night when you should be normally sleeping, and then you just did physical labor for 12 or 14 hours. So I think we have to be mindful about, hey, on Monday, Aaron and Pablo are doing security. Then Tuesday, Aaron and Pablo can do ditch digging. And then if they go back on rotation on Wednesday, then they can do security again with something light. So you still got to wear multiple hats, but you get the drift I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
But going, and then one more point, and then I'll have you guys chime in. Then it's just like, how do you figure out how many people you need? And what gets the priority? And the smaller the number, the smaller the scale you got to be. You're not having anybody running patrols if you only have X amount. But you might have someone that can sit there and go around the house periodically and break it up, or keep an eye out in the window at nighttime. Just there's all kinds of variety. But then you need to scale up to, say, 16 people. What can you do with that to do all the jobs? But what if you only have 8 or 5? And what if there's 5 of them are children and you got 3 adults? So with all those attributes said, Pablo, Pablo, why don't you chime in first, and then we'll dip over to Aaron.
Yeah, it really depends on the situation or the setup. Um, so like in my case, like it's unless I really coordinate with my neighbors, like it's really hard to kind of plan for all those activities.
Yeah.
For most of it, I'm planning basically to do it myself, which is tough because again, I gotta sleep at some point. But from that perspective, in order to solve some of the lack of resources, you gotta get creative.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can use it depending on the property you're protecting. In my case, it's fairly small. Like I can rely on spotlights or movement lights. Like if you walk close enough, the light's going to shine on you. That's going to be one deterrent. Um, Another option, depending on if you're a 1 or 2 story house, if you have the option, then yeah, you can be on the second floor window and have a view of the streets. If you don't, you have to be on the roof. But then, how long can you actually stay on the roof,
Yeah.
being comfortable?
Yep.
Because if you have to respond to something, your legs can be asleep, and you can't just tweak your back because you were sitting like this the whole time because it's on an incline. Um, so you got to get creative. So you have some wireless cameras. They can just pop on a tree and have visibility on a specific area. Those cameras would be battery operated, so you don't have to run cords or anything. Just walk up, tie it up, point in a direction, and then now you have visibility into this street or this area that someone could walk through. The other option would be using drones. Like, yeah, I gotta sleep, but I'll set an alarm for every hour, every 2 hours, pop the drone up, off a few 100 meters, look around, there's nothing there. Or maybe I can have something like a weather balloon. It's tied to the house so it doesn't drift, and I have a camera on it. It might be a little hard to control the angles and stuff, but I actually have something out there that's not making noise. It's not using batteries, but it actually gives me some visibility into what's going on around me.
Yeah, and you can tether it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the you have to be creative based on your situation, and use resources or technology wisely. Because again, at least in my case, like even if I had some people here, again, it's not that big. So trying to have, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this. There's not a lot of chores to do really. But at the same time, being in suburbia, me having a group of people patrolling the house, and then if I don't have a strong relationship with all my neighbors, then I'm going to freak them out and might
Mm-hmm.
trigger some kind of response. So it's really tough in an area that has so many people, um, getting everybody on board and making sure that everybody knows what's happening, unless everybody really wants to contribute. But at that point, you need radios, you need protocols, and a whole bunch of stuff that it's not impossible to do, but it's also not easy. And by easy, I mean like people need to have the commitment
Yep.
to actually, yes, I'm going to have the radio. I'm going to check in every hour, and if I see something, this is what I'm going to say, not just, hey, something's up. Like, what do you mean? What do I need to do? Where do we need to redirect all the resources? So it takes a lot of work and planning, and unfortunately, most people are not really willing to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people are not going to be moldable until the crisis hits and reality sits in. That's why we got to be, flexible ourselves and be able to, what's the word I'm looking here? I don't know, navigate the different people and their personalities and their emotions and stuff, and try to find ways to utilize people or keep them out at arm's length. What about you, Aaron? What are your thoughts on what I said?
So a lot of that those manpower requirements are actually available in military manuals. They're a little bit of a dry reading, and they do take a little bit of adjustment, but you can find for cooking and sanitation and security and all kinds of different stuff. And a lot of those military manuals are available for free. A lot of the field manuals the Army has, the declassified portions are readily available. Like you could buy the hard copy versions off of Amazon if you want. So I typically look at like security for people, and what I've come to do is like somebody who just tells me that they'll help me out in a crisis event is not really that useful to me.
Right.
People who are actually training and willing to put in the effort on a regular basis, and they're prioritizing that over other things. Like, I used to have, I called it the rule of three, where I would invite people to a training event 3 times. If they told me no every time, I would sit down and if this person doesn't have an irreplaceable skill, I'm just not going to bother them with it. They have different priorities, and that's fine, right? Like, I had one guy tell me, oh, this training event's too expensive, and then he came back from like a 30-day vacation in the Keys. I get it, dude. Chasing your wife around in a bikini is important. Hopefully she's the one wearing the bikini, not him. But like,
I don't know the Keys.
Yeah, I can't imagine how many thousands of dollars that spent in like my little, $500 or $600 training course for like what's going to end up being 24 hours of training is like too much for you. I get it. That's cool. Won't bother you again. So with that, in a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, Pablo, like waking up every 2 hours, I have insomnia. So like I go through periods where I do that. It sucks. Your decision making starts to degrade, and your physical skill set starts to degrade too. And like, they've done a bunch of studies on performance athletes and trying to make them do math and undergo endurance tasks after long periods of interrupted sleep. And it's like, if you're doing it every 2 hours and somebody's watching you, like they're just going to pattern you. Oh, that drone goes up every 2 hours. All right, it's down. So we got an hour and 59 minutes for shenanigans.
Yeah.
Before he wakes up again. So like, that's where, to me, that disaster community, like if you don't have access to a training pipeline like the one I've set up, or you don't have a lot of people that are, easy to network with in your local area, going in and just talk to your HOA and say, hey, we live in Florida. Hurricanes are a fact of life. I'd like to, talk to the HOA about setting up some local resources. Find out what your local, if your city government has any local resources. Once you start moving in those streams, then you start to find out, oh, well, I got into the community emergency response team, and, now I know where all the shelters are. And also now I know, what the evacuation plans are for this area. Mm-hmm. And I know where there's likely to be checkpoints. Hey, this is a really great return on investment for volunteering.
Yeah. Well, there are many people that will say what Pablo has said, okay? But Pablo's a person that would do it. So Pablo has a plan based on Pablo.
Yeah.
And, and I believe he'll do it. But odds are a lot of the guys that come up, if they even come up with a plan, they won't do it. They might try. They'll come up with excuses, oh, nothing's going on. I'll sleep a little bit later. I got to do this other thing. They'll start neglecting things. So these are the people that, well, I know Pablo is doing that is a worst case, but he knows it's better to have more people. So he has to have a plan that if he doesn't have people, but then if he has people, I'm sure he has a plan or ways to adjust it. Quite confident in that. Where so many other people in the space might not have a plan, and if they do, they don't know how to scale. or they'll just try to dump off stuff they don't want to do, and then try to be a boss versus a leader. And if they even try to conceive of anything, because
I'm not trying to be Pablo for that.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean it's a valid. Those are all valid points. Like, yeah, it's fairly easy to, specifically someone who has a nefarious intent. They're more likely to notice patterns.
Yep.
So yeah, if you see the drone or whatever going up every 2 hours, like, okay, then we kind of know what he's doing and what his deal is. But yeah, it's just that at least in my experience, that level of finding people who are willing to put in the work and have that level of commitment has been really tough. I will bring it up at the next HOA meeting about some kind of community response or whatever for hurricanes, because I mean this area is for, there's a lot of elderly people, so that's somewhat of an easy entry. It was like, okay, during a hurricane, getting an ambulance out here is going to be tough. Do people have medical training? Blah, blah, blah. Like, is there any kind of communication, service, event, protocol, whatever, calling tree, whatever it is? That would be an easy entry to start talking about it.
Yeah, even getting people to go knock on doors to check on people. Say, hey, I'll volunteer. And maybe not everyone that volunteers before the storm will actually go and do it. But if you got some people that will do it, I mean, it's nothing but gravy at that point. And then it's like, if you needed a central place, unless you have a really small HOA, generally a lot of the HOAs have some kind of small clubhouse. You could always say, hey, post-storm, we'll have some people here for check-in, make sure everybody's okay. You can find a variety of ways, because some people are like, well, I don't want anybody coming to my house. You can say, hey, all the volunteers meet at the clubhouse, and we can start, figuring out who can go check on who. We'll do a block by block or whatever. Just the brainstorming is a win. People talking about it is a win. I mean, the fact that Pablo is willing to bring it up to his HOA, is a win. And I know Andy has been trying to do stuff with his neighbors too. And it's frustrating for people, because we always talk about, we run into people that are not serious, or they're not interested, or they act like they are, but they don't have commitment. It's hard. It's easy, but it's hard to go around your neighborhood and try to connect with people in our day and age, because, we get solicitors all the time, and people are like, what are you going to try to do to me? So if you're not a solicitor, then maybe you're some kind of nefarious person. I don't know you, that's why I think it's important when you're outside, you see people walking their dog or walking, just say, hey, I wave. So they put the face to the house. So if you sit there and roll up on their house and you knock on their door and you go, hey, I'm Pablo. I live over on this street over here. Oh yeah, I think I see you sometimes when I'm walking my dog. It brings the temperature down. And it's hard to get rejected. People roll their eyes. People are jerks a lot of times. I mean, especially online. So if Pablo's HOA community had a next door thing like mine does, with the neighborhoods all in there, and I've sat there and said, hey, who wants to do rucking and hiking? I'll get some responses, but then, it's too high. It's this or that. I just posted today for Saturday's event. And I waited till late because there's all these excuses. So it's like, basically either people are interested and they're available. So it's Thursday. So you know what? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So if I get one person, that's a win from my neighborhood, Yeah.
Well, a lot of times too, like, especially with this discussion, and it almost sounds, counterintuitive, because we're talking about security, and there's kind of like that understood idea of, violence is inherent to that. That it's a possibility. I might need to take my security tools and go secure some stuff. Like, that's enough euphemisms that hopefully we get past the censors. But at the end of the day, you end up with a profound appreciation for the fact that you need people.
Yep.
And just little things like, how do you break the ice and establish rapport with people that are around you?
Yeah.
Like, especially in the suburbs, it's very easy to become very absorbed in your own life, and you don't tend to go out and network and build that sense of community and everything. Like, I had more knowledge of who my neighbors were when I lived in Section 8 housing as a kid than I did when I lived in the suburbs about 15, 20 minutes southeast of that same Section 8 apartment complex.
Yeah.
And I found that most of my neighbors, I mean, we had some stinkers in there, and I ended up having disputes with some of them, but like, for the most part, they were pretty cool people. And I got to eat some really great Latin foods and tamales and some like puerco asado and stuff like that. So just for saying hi and like being kind to somebody. But approaching that HOA and knowing, okay, who's going to get involved? Like, if we come up with a project, who gets involved?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're a renter, going out and because I know several people in the subdevelopments that are or the suburbs that they look down on like renters as like second class citizens. But he's just a renter. He's just in a position. He's going to be gone in a year anyway. 5 years max. That guy's out of there. No reason to get to know him. But if you go, hey, my name's Dom. I have kids. I'd like to see to their care and well-being. And like, even if you don't get anywhere with that, wait till the next hurricane. Make up a little aid pack of like some baby wipes, some deodorant, toothbrush, toothpaste, and a roll of toilet paper. And like, go knock on a door. Hey, neighbor, I don't have a lot of these, but I know we've lived next to each other for a while now. I don't really know you, but my water's been off for a couple of days. Here's this little comfort thing that maybe that can help you guys out somewhere. Like, it takes a real jerk that's coming, that's receiving you at their door with a gift for their family to just go, oh, eat crap and die, dude. I don't want anything to do with you. Right?
Yeah.
Like, most of the time, I'll ask an open-ended question when I do that. How did you do during the storm? What was your plan? Okay, well, I know we made it through this one. Like, I've got a couple more of these to drop off. Do you know of anybody who really needs these right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I live 5 minutes away from here. This is my office, and my mom's been out of power for a while.
Yeah.
And like, even if you just have a battery bank, my kids are going crazy because they haven't been able to charge their phones in a while. Sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. Let me drop the rest of this stuff off in the neighborhood, and then let's go take care of your people. Is there anything else they need? Yeah. And then I go, and now I'm like, how is that guy going to remember me in the next event?
Yeah.
I'm the guy that brought in some creature comfort so he could feel like a freaking human again. I took care of his people, his family, his mom, maybe wife and kids and things like that. Like, I just made a friend. And so many of the people I've met in prepping are so freaking socially awkward.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how to, engage with people.
Yeah. Hearts and minds, man.
Yeah. It's like, dude, they still have to wipe their butt. They still have to wipe their armpits. They stink after 3 days with no power and no shower. And everybody likes to scrub the sweaters off of their teeth if they haven't been able to in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Give them a gallon of Zephyr Hills water. Don't give them Dasani unless you really hate them. But like, Zephyr Hills, that's the bargaining water up here.
Yeah.
So,
all right, we're getting close to the end here. So, when it comes to like patrol or recon or a mobile observation, listening. Be mindful of the resources in your area. You know, many shows back, because we talked about when trucking stops, how long it takes for things to come back online. And I was thinking about that today. And I was thinking, I think it was for every 1 day that trucking stops, I think it's 3 days for the system to gear back up for the flow. And then I was thinking, well, man, that's assuming that they're still able to produce things. Because we learned during COVID, I mean, stuff just shut down. So it kind of delays it. So it's one thing if a hurricane comes through and the big mega warehouses that feed the Costco's and the Sam's, they're off the road for like a day or two. Okay, so it's going to take 3 to 5 days, whatever, to get enough stuff to the right people. Same thing with gas. Okay. But the governor was making sure the gas was coming in.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the gas wasn't there. It's just logistically, it takes time to not only get it to the places, fill in the deficit. Okay. And, people's needs or desires grow every day that the storm is past us. Yep. So, but then with the food, you have something similar, but that's assuming we're only impacted here in Florida in certain aspects. But we get into a regional event, then I'm like, it's going to take even longer. So, and I was thinking, well, they say, oh, have 72 hours or have 2 weeks. Well, dang, if we have to sit there and use our 2 weeks of food to, like when we had COVID, 2 weeks to stop the spread. So if everything we just said, we're going to stop for 2 weeks and then, flatten the curve. So if we go 2 weeks, if everyone shut down and then you say, okay, we're open now. Well, there's no resources. So how long is it going to take the resources to build up? Then for the truckers to get them out there. So it seems to get exponentially worse every day that goes by versus that ratio of 1 to 3, because food production, gas production. And so that being our final topic, well, Aaron, how want you start off, and then Pablo will close with you after that.
So related to that, I have a story about a friend of mine during COVID who does not live in this state and has a rural piece of property. In his state, they have a tradition kind of amongst the rural residents there called white lighting. And that's where they'll drive around in their trucks and they'll put a spotlight on a deer because the deer will freeze for a second, and then they'll shoot it. And then they'll throw it in the back of their truck and go. Tradition dictates that you usually have a bottle of whiskey, jar of shine, or a 24-pack of beer, because nothing gets, high caliber firearms, paired better than like alcohol.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was talking with him about, he's like, dude, these guys don't care what their backstop is. Like, I've got holes in the camper from a 30-06 that got made last night that's right in front of my house. I live in a manufactured home. Nothing in here is cover. It's all just concealment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about it for a little bit, and the solution that we arrived at was he had a suppressed 22, and he would sit out and wait for the guys that were white lighting, and he would pop their radiators. Because finding spare parts during COVID in 2021 and 2022 was really hard. But it did. I mean, that suppressed 22 sounds like a branch breaking.
Yeah.
Didn't make a big thing out of it. Didn't get into a big gunfight, and didn't kill the truck right there. Yeah. They were able to drive a little bit until they saw that heat gauge start spiking, and they became somebody else's problem. All of a sudden, there's no white lighters around his area. It's great. So with the supply chain disruptions, it's like how many years? I know some industries that are still dealing with post-COVID effects, and so one of my friends works in the sawmill industry, and they have German machines. And you bring a tech over from Germany to have these huge sawmill equipment machines, service and everything like that. And he's like, we couldn't get a guy over from Germany for 2 years. And then he's got to order a proprietary part. They're going to put that on the slowest, most idiotic turtle, to ship it. And it sucked. So that's where, like, the idea of, you talk a lot about scaling. How do you scale up in a disaster?
Yeah.
How do you look at this and go, okay, I've got my little 72 hours. What's my 2 weeks look like? How many people is it for? What's security look like 2 weeks after the lights go out?
Mm-hmm.
If I am having to, charge my drones, or, I've got a solar battery bank, like, what am I looking at for running my freezer? How do I keep people that are listening for my generator from knowing, oh, he still has fuel?
Yeah.
I could probably go, sit in his air conditioning for a little bit. Or, to me, like you talked about OPSEC earlier, one of my big concerns is always like somebody else decides to unite the community, and then they take it upon themselves to decide what is reasonable for people to have.
Or to give up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're a hoarder, right? You're hoarding all these necessary supplies. No, dude, I didn't take 30-day vacations to the Keys. I bought all this crap because I ate ramen occasionally. Hey, it's my stuff. I don't care how much of it that you want. Like, I'll give you a couple rounds, but they're going to be coming really quick, so you got to catch them.
Yeah.
But that's where it starts going out and taking this idea to its logical conclusion about being able to sustain operations over a longer period of time. Being able to sustain during a rebuild. There's still places in New Orleans that are showing signs of Katrina. Like,
yeah.
How long is that rebuild going to last?
Yeah. Well, people leave, and then everything just goes to pot. There's no incentive. All right. So, Pablo, what are your final thoughts on that? And
Yeah, well, related to what Aaron was saying, I got into the habit of buying extra for everything. So, like an example is the hand soap that I use in the bathroom and in the kitchen. Like, I have enough to refill it a few times before I actually need to buy more. However, as soon as one bottle is done, I'll go buy more.
yeah.
So, like, I'm looking at a bunch of different things, thinking about those issues that we had during COVID. So, like, toilet paper, like, I've got a bunch of toilet paper right now. Paper towels, I don't technically need to buy more, but every now and then, if I see something that has a good price or whatever, I don't go to Sam's every time. But if I'm at Sam's, like, well, I'm gonna grab another one of these. So, and like I mentioned yesterday, like, if in case for my car, I have extra gas, I have all the fluids, I have brake pads. Um, so if I need to service my car, and I can't go to the dealer or shop or whatever, like, I can take care of my car for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
So, uh, it's not easy and to just buy all that stuff at the same time. Um, but just every now and then, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and eventually it all adds up.
Yeah.
Because yeah, when I took the cert course, they just emphasize, okay, have about a 2 to 3 day supply of water and food, blah blah blah. But realistically, that's just not enough.
Yeah.
Especially like if you can't buy bread or pasta or rice or whatever. Um, and for me, it's a little bit more complex because I can't. It's hard for me to rely on canned food because I have digestive issues, and if I eat like Chef Boyardee or something like that, like the heartburn comes so fast.
Yeah.
It's really hard to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you have to weigh I was thinking about this today, like how do you weigh the pros and cons of this is the only thing I can eat, but if I do this enough, am I going to get a stomach ulcer or something?
Mm-hmm.
Or how many tums do I have to store to keep the heartburn at bay?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
so from that perspective, me specifically, it's hard to rely on canned food because no matter how healthy you might say it is, it the heartburn is amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to think about other options.
Yeah. No, those are good points. So, one thing I want the audience to really, take to heart is that 72 hours, 2 weeks, it's not enough if you really dig down into real disruptions. It's not like things are magically going to pop back on. And then you always got to be prepared to scale up because we can't do it alone. So you might have enough food for you for 2 weeks, but you're going to bring people in or you're going to bring your stuff to them and you got to last. So you need to have more to have people help you. You got to feed them too. We could all say, oh, well, you need to get their own stuff. Yeah. But you know what? What if they had to escape from where they're at? Got flooded out, a fire, and they don't have anything. So you're still not going to feed them? If you want bodies, plan on having the food and supplies for these people. And a lot of things that you were, toilet paper, paper towels, hand soap, those are all things that you use. It's not like you're buying cases of Chef Boyardee, okay, and Vienna sausages like a lot of preppers do, and they don't even eat that junk. Your rice, your beans. If it's stuff that you're normally using, there's no reason why you can't just stockpile more of it as long as it, stays usable under the mindset that you're going to bring people in, even if you don't know who they are right now. So with that said, we're almost at the 2-hour mark. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We'll continue this series using other pillars of preparedness. We had some great viewing tonight, great comments. Appreciate everyone chiming in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, reach out to us, come to our events. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time. All right. You guys be good.